Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellbite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Doing something a little bit different here today and spending a little bit of time here to talk about ARAM and how you can get the most value out of your ARAM gameplay. Now, I'm aware that ARAM is not exactly the most competitive game mode ever, and nor should it be. I think that something like a ranked ARAM queue should never exist because it is just a fun, stupid game mode. But ideally, if you're the kind of person who really doesn't like ARAM because of how random it can be, or who generally is not a fan of the game, or maybe you're brand new and you're trying to figure out what exactly this ARAM mode is all about, then I hope this guide is somewhat helpful to you guys in your upcoming gameplay. Now, I'm aware Samira is out. Unfortunately, she just came out, so I will not have an opportunity to do a video on her quite yet, so make sure you guys stay tuned to the channel, maybe even subscribe, because I will be putting out some information on her, ideally this Friday. Anyways, moving on to ARAM. First and foremost, remember that this game mode is team fight oriented. You can try and win ARAMs with poke, but for the most part, you'll have to actually win team fights in order to push, because only one wave's worth of minions will never stand up to the full damage of 5 champions. It just does not happen. Even if you're able to hit the tower with the minions, your ability to step up afterwards and hit the tower is very limited. You can kind of get some poke off depending on the champion you're playing. So, for example, a Tristana with rapid fire cannon and a Caitlyn with a rapid fire cannon, they can kind of walk up and get maybe 1 or 2 hits off on the tower while the minions are there, but especially against certain enemy teams, you don't really have the opportunity to do that because stepping up means that you're going to take skill shots, or their wave clear is just way too good. If you have something like a Xerath and Vel'Koz on the same team, well, you're not really going to be able to do too much about that. So at the end of the day, you are going to have to be able to win team fights regardless of how well you're able to push and regardless of how well you're able to wave clear. You basically will have to try and win a fight at some point. As such, you should be trying to focus on the opportunities and the things that can set you up for good team fights. For example, you really want to be trying to fight when you have numbers. So if you have a numbers advantage over the enemy team, if they've been poked down fairly low and your team is healthy, that can be a good time to pick a team fight. Or if you see the enemy team has whiffed an important cooldown, or if they're down an important team member. So for example, if the enemy Sejuani uses her ultimate and misses entirely, that might be an opportunity to look for a team fight. As you know, they're down Glacial Prison, that powerful initiation ultimate can't be used against you, and now it might be a good time to actually look for that fight. On top of that, it's very important to fight when you have clear initiation. Just because you used your initiation move, if you hit an enemy frontliner, or if you only hit maybe one champion with something like a Malphite R, you don't have to commit to that fight, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a bad initiation for you. You're not going to be able to get anything out of it, even if you think you might be able to take that fight, because you're just going to be down. You're going to be down resources, you're going to be down members, and it's not going to be ideal. You want to be looking for as clean of an initiation as you can get, because otherwise the enemy team can very easily counter-engage. Now, a lot of this can come down to exactly what composition you have to work with in ARAM. As we've talked about, this game mode is entirely random. So you won't always have a composition that works well with a structured team fight, but you can still know how to play the fight and how exactly this will work out for you guys at the end of the day, because yeah, you won't always be able to say we have a great team fight and composition, but we may have some ways of playing around it and some ways of making it work. So for example, the composition that's on screen here, on my team, we actually have a fairly easy comp, even though we don't have a clear, hard initiation character like an Ashe Enchanted Crystal Arrow or something like that. We do still have ways of starting fights by using the Kled Charge in order to accelerate the cannon into the middle of the enemy team for slicing Maelstrom. This Swain can fall up off the backside of that, and the Twisted Fate here actually does help, because by teleporting the backline with Destiny, he's able to split up the team fight and sort of keep the enemy team between a rock and a hard place, though that is a risky place for the TF to play in. Either way, that is the kind of initiation, the ideal form of a fight that this composition can look for. Now, on the other hand, the enemy team has a very effective way of sort of peeling back and playing from behind. Morgana is a very good counter-engaged champion. They have frontline champions that can sort of take things like the Kled ultimate if they do try to fight. Azir can summon a tower and is generally a very good champion who can play while sort of kiting backwards and preventing the enemy team from being where they want to be. So they essentially are playing a counter-engaged composition in this regard because of the tools they have at their disposal. And being able to sort of figure out what tools you have and which compositions you're able to play is actually an important skill in ARAM, and sort of knowing how you can pick fights, but also how you can play around an enemy team's fight. If you know they're going to be hard engaging on you, look at the kind of tools your team has for disengaging, or simply just say, we know they're going to engage, so as soon as they try to come in, back up, give them space, try to stretch out the team fight, because at that point you'll be able to ideally overextend the tanks, finish them off without the support of their carries, and then be able to finish the carries off in the background. Even if you have teams with very high amounts of damage and very few frontliners, you can still pull it off, but it does end up being very significantly harder because you have to worry about your team not having very good ability to make space. If you have a 480 carry team with a single support, as for example, it can be quite difficult to figure out a way to play that composition because, well, you don't really have someone who can go in and start a fight. You have no one who can take a skill shot. It's just a lot of damage. However, you can mitigate a lot of these composition shortcomings in Champ Select with smart rerolling. Now, I know that generally speaking, it is more fun to play a damage character than it is to play a support character or tank character in this game mode. And trust me, if you're just playing ARAM for fun, generally speaking, you don't really care, by all means, go ahead. This is not designed to say you guys should never, ever play damage characters in ARAM. But if you are looking to have slightly more success in your ARAM games, definitely consider re-rolling until you can get at least one or two frontliners on the team, because that will help you actually have the ability to sort of peel back and kite back and otherwise pick fights that you wouldn't be able to if all you have is damage. You almost always need a frontline, so even if you're looking at the champions that are available and there's a Sona that's free and there's a Xerath that's free and there's a Nidalee that's free, if you have the ability to play a tank, it may be worth it to play a tank if no one else on your team is going to do that, because tanks are very important for team fighting, and essentially that's all ARAM is. You can't split push in an ARAM, you can't really play pick comp in ARAM, you essentially just have to try and beat the enemy team in fights outside of a few situations, so generally speaking, that is what you will have to try and do. Finally, you are going to want to know when to die in this game mode. Winning fights and taking objectives is fine, but there is such a thing as surviving too long. I think I actually recently played a game where the enemy Ivern had 8,000 gold and hadn't died, which is really cool, and honestly, it's alright on that champion because Ivern has so much utility that he doesn't scale very well with gold. Having gold on Ivern is nice, but he doesn't have to have it because of the value he can bring just through things like Daisy and trigger siege shields and the roots that he can throw out. So generally speaking, that's okay, but especially if you're a damage character, and especially if you're something like a crit-based AD carry who really wants to be scaling and getting their Infinity Edge and getting their critical strike chance, you are going to need to go buy items after a certain time, so even if you can survive forever, it's not necessarily a good idea. Now, the idea here is that essentially, if you win a team fight, you're able to sort of push down an objective or two, and that's fine, but you might find that your health bars are low, and that what's probably going to happen is the enemy team will respawn, they'll be full health, they'll have cooldowns, and they'll essentially be able to take the immediate team fight following that play and sort of equalize the objectives. Instead, it can be a good idea to wait for the enemy team to respawn, and then essentially run directly at them and just try to do as much damage to them as possible before you die. That means that you will be able to chunk out the enemy team, you may even get cooldowns that they otherwise wouldn't have wanted to have expended, and it does mean that you will be back in base, ready to buy items and ready to respawn for the next team fight, and therefore not have to fight at a disadvantage where you don't have items, you don't have the ability to really fight back against what the enemy team is bringing to bear. Now, ideally, you don't want to be getting aced in any of these situations, because the enemy team will very easily be able to push back and take objectives, and it does hand a lot of gold back into their pockets. However, you still want to die at some point, and so ideally you can kind of snowball the deaths, especially if your team has very good wave clear. You can say, alright, these two guys are going to die right now. The guys who actually died during the fight, they will respawn and be able to at least wave clear or play defense around the tower in order to keep the enemy team from pushing back and sort of equalizing the score at that point. Now, this is going to be fairly risky because the enemy team, they know that they're going to have numbers advantage, and especially if they have a very durable frontline champion that can tank a tower, they may initiate under the tower, and in that case, it's fine to yield towers, and it's fine to yield towers even if your team loses a fight. If you're the only survivor of a losing team fight and the enemy team are pushing down 4-man strong, it probably isn't a good idea to stand underneath a tower on your own because they'll just have enough damage to kill you instantly, probably because you're very low on HP anyways. However, you do want to make sure you're yielding those towers because there's no reason to try and fight for it at that point. You're just going to die and the tower's going to die anyways. The important thing in this game mode is to make sure that you're fighting as 5 as much as possible. So the biggest thing here is to avoid what's called trickling, which is where one team member dies, so you have to fight a 4v5. So you lose maybe 1 or 2 team members there, and you're not able to kill anyone on the enemy team. And then a team member respawns, they run at the low health enemy team members, and they get killed there. And essentially what happens is you trickle in one at a time, and you're never able to get a kill because you're fighting one at a time, whereas the enemy team is fighting as their 5-man squad. So ideally, you never want to be in a situation where that happens. You want to be trying to find an opportunity to fight before, once you've found all of your team members. You also want to make sure that you're not getting poked down in advance, if it's a possibility. Obviously, it's ARAM, it's hard to dodge all of the skill shots that are heading your way, but especially if the enemy team has really good poke, or better poke than yours, it might be a place where you just hard force an initiation, because you know you're going to lose the team fight if everyone is half health before it even starts, so it doesn't make any sense at that point to try and go for it. It doesn't make any sense to wait around for a perfect initiation. You might have to go for whatever you've got. So ideally, that's kind of how you're going to want to play it. And those are just the tips that I've come up with while playing ARAM. Obviously, I've been playing this game for a long time. I kind of have an idea of how this game mode goes, but I am far from an ARAM only player. So if you guys have any tips of your own, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. Would love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.